This is the Unrationed podcast. My name is Evan,
I'm Josh.
I am Tony.
and Tony will be holding the mic closer to his mouth this episode based off of some feedback from one of our listeners, Tony's wife, Seville. Thank you, Seville, for that feedback.
It is
And
very valuable feedback, and I will be making an improvement in this episode.
there we are. So last week, actually just a few days ago, this past weekend, we were able to get together in person, and I met you guys, and it didn't feel any different than meeting you over Zoom. I feel like we've gotten to know each other well, but it was awesome to be together and be out in the wilds doing the thing that we've been talking about doing for some time. So we begin every podcast with our wild moments from the week. I have a fairly good idea of what your wild moments will consist of, and I bet you do for me as well. But let's just like run through this episode, our wild moments, and maybe have it be a breakdown of our experience uh covering some ground in Colorado this past weekend. So Josh, do you want to start us out?
Yeah. Um, so I guess it was Friday morning. So we camped out Thursday night. We kind of have a base camp for the weekend. And Friday morning we were putzing out to go to the truck to drive to the trailhead. So, anyways, it was about a mile of a hike to get to the car. So, anyways, we were getting, I don't know, maybe 200, 400 yards away from the truck, and I realized I forgot the satellite phone, which was a very important piece of the overall objective. So, anyways, I had to jog back to the campsite while everybody else went to the truck. And while I was jogging back, I saw these like my headlamp like shined on these two eyes that were just like staring at me. And like my heart just like skipped a beat. I was like, oh, geez, what is this? So, anyways, like as I got closer, as I just kind of like stood still there, actually, the deer, this big old buck, moved. But it was like really cool. We just like locked eyes for I don't know, maybe 10 seconds or something, but it felt like an eternity not knowing what the animal was. And then it kind of moved on. So that was pretty cool. My heart definitely started to beat quite a bit faster, had that like adrenaline. So I think I keep coming back to that moment as a pretty special thing. It was when I left you guys to go back somewhere else that I encountered this, right? So I was by myself, with this unknown creature until it was known. So I've thought about that a lot over the last few days.
Mine, I'm going to choose the lake. Yeah, so the rest of that day, that first day Josh described involved going up Mount Huron, 14,005 feet. Um, we got our butts kicked. Three of us did at least. Only one of us vomited. But oh, I should mention that Billy was with us, who is not on this podcast. But then the next morning, on Saturday morning, the four of us hiked out to Lake Anne, which is at what is it, Josh? 12,200 feet.
12,100.
Yeah, and it's in this gorgeous valley, kind of surrounded by peaks, really clear water that's this interesting bluish color. And we all just stripped down and ran into this freezing water and just howled. Um, and there was nobody around. Nobody around for who knows how long. Um, that's wild. That's what that is. Evan, how about you? Did I just take yours?
No, I mean the whole weekend honestly was a wild moment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Sometimes when I think of the word moment, I have trouble defining what time frame a moment is, and I do think looking back on this past weekend as a moment in time is kind of how I'm framing that. So the entire weekend was a moment. My wife and my daughter came out to Colorado with me before we hit the trail, and we spent some time in Vail. Did a little bit of hiking up there, and it was an incredible time. So this wild moment of mine doesn't feel wild because it didn't necessarily happen in the woods, but it was definitely because of the trip and what we were doing that I had this moment. So when I dropped my wife, Grace, when I dropped Grace and Olive off at the airport, I still had a hotel room there at the airport. And I was waiting for Billy to pick me up so Billy and I could drive down to Josh's house. And it was this moment of separation. It was this moment of disorientation that I conceptually know about, but forget what the experience is like until it happens again. So I'm going to combine that actually. I haven't had time to process. This is like me processing out loud. So forgive me for jumping around here for a few minutes. The night before, I was very tired and somewhat stressed about all the details of like getting the hotel, the rental car, uh, the next day, like what was happening, meeting you guys in person, and not knowing Billy who was picking me up. And so, like, all these things were happening that it kind of made me wonder if I was even being wise in doing all of this, like sending Grace and Olive back home. Like, I'm just going to be here in Colorado. This is like the first time that I'm leaving the kids. And I seriously was having some questions of like, do I just go home too? Do I like not even do this
Yeah.
because this seems silly that I feel so stressed and I feel like I'm causing stress. Like this is the opposite of what is supposed to be happening with what we're doing. And then I remembered the first night in the RV when my wife and I took this RV adventure, and it was like the same thing. We were questioning everything after we had already like rented out the house, sold our cars, bought an RV. Like everything was packed up, and we're sitting in the RV the first night, just crying, like, what the heck are we doing? Why are we doing this? And like, did we just make a horrible decision? And I start to remember that that's a part of the disorientation that we've talked about in this podcast. Is like I felt very disoriented, not knowing whether or not I was making the right decision. And what I did in the moment though, or so the next morning, woke up at very early, took Grace and Olive to the airport, and then had some time like alone in the hotel room, which is a very disorienting place to be. Like they're not the happiest of places. So I spent time like writing and journaling and trying to like express these feelings or identify these feelings that I had. And I identified several. I'm gonna read this real quick just because I feel like this is the place to do that.
We just
All right.
made
What were you gonna say?
nothing of substance.
I don't know if I will I'm gonna be reading this. I don't exactly remember what all I wrote. So this is just straight from
Sounds great.
the morning. This is September 1st. It's at Weston at the Denver airport. Just dropped Olive and Grace off at the airport. I didn't expect the emotions to well up like they did when I dropped Grace and Olive off at the security checkpoint this morning. The knot in my throat was the size of a baseball, and tears pooled in my eyes. My chest was ready, diaphragm on the verge of pulsing to keep oxygen flowing as my brain tries to make sense of something my body knows. You love those girls and you don't want to be separated from them. Why would you choose to do this? My eyes water up as I read this again. To my brain, this is a new experience, and a disorienting one at that. But it seems as though my body has been here before. And then I've got some moments that my body reminds me of the same feelings. Going to school for the first time. spending a week at camp as a child, spending summers in Florida and college, leaving Oklahoma and moving to Georgia, saying goodbye to my mom for the last time, Grace going to Greece after graduating college, and leaving on an RV adventure. The way my body feels right now is not so different than the times above. I'm inclined to say these are even remnant feelings from the bodies of my ancestors. I'm carrying their DNA, their experiences, their stories. I kind of go on from there. That was my wild moment. I'll just leave it at that for now. But my wild moment was the feeling of disorientation. It was the feeling of leaving the known and entering the unknown. And it had less to do with the woods and more to do with choosing to do something that was disorienting, knowing that there's good that comes from doing that.
Thanks for sharing that.
Seemed like Josh was about to talk, right?
No, I'm just processing all that. It's really good stuff. Evan and I were chatting before we started recording, and Tony, I think you were getting a cup of coffee or something, but because I had done that route before, I didn't have the same like disorienting effect or like experience. And so hearing that makes this weekend like that much more special too, I think, in my mind, where I'm very grateful and honored to have been a part of those experiences for you, you know. And that, yeah, we were chatting over the weekend multiple times where we're like hiking or running, or after we jump into a lake and talking about how, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, this was just an idea. And we're sitting here talking on Zoom, and all of a sudden it gave purpose to preparation, to this podcast, to all different types of things. So to see that come to fruition, and the culmination of lots of months of work is pretty special. Very special.
I like how you articulated um, that moment right at that moment of grasping, right after you're off the ledge. That seems almost inevitable whenever we do take a leap, whether big or small. That there's, I remember something similar when I torched my legal career for the first time back in 2013 and was about ready to board a one-way flight to Bangkok, uh, with a pack and my girlfriend at the time, intending to be there for a year, and just, is this a terrible idea? Yeah. After the job's been quit and the apartment's gotten rid of, and there's no more car and there's no more stuff, it's like, well, kind of burned the boats. Nowhere to go but forward and step into it. And it's, once we cross that threshold, then it seems like it's better, right? Was that your experience on this, Evan? That like once you were into it, that feeling went away?
Yeah, I think that would be the case with all of the moments I mentioned too, or like read from my journal there. There is a navigation period. Some of them are long, like take longer though, to get to that place. Like the threshold is not just a day or a couple hours, or like those thresholds can last a while. And it does seem as though there is a reorientation that occurs at some point in time in the future, though.
Word.
Yeah. You were sharing that. It made me think about, or why Tony was talking actually. I realized that I have a hard time with recognizing when the disorientation occurs. Like I feel like I'm missing like a a decision making element in my brain. I'm like, yeah, that sounds fun, and I'm gonna do that. And I'm not asking that why question. So I'm in something that's intense. I'm in a wild moment. I'm in something that's very strenuous. And it's like I all of a sudden I don't know how I got there. I'm like, huh,
Mm.
what were my decisions leading up to this? So like the last thing I'm thinking about is that 100K that I did in April. And I wanted to do it because it was like preparation, but I remember at like mile 50 or something, like this kind of sucks. But it wasn't until I was taking a bath afterwards at like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm like pulling uh like cactus needles out of my like shin in the bath. And I'm like, I'm never doing this again. Like, why did I do this? Like, this is terrible. So it was like that period of reflection occurred after, that whole build up, that journey or something. So like there's something about um that I'm like trying to work out on the fly right now. Like, why is that with me? Where like I get into these moments that I think are going to be great, but I'm not looking for the disorientation, but the disorientation occurs after the fact in some of these experiences. But then like an hour later, I'm like, okay, I can do this again. I can give it another go. But it's cool to see when those periods, just when you were talking and Tony was talking, like when those disorientation or when that disorientation occurs for each person, because it's not always going to be the same.
Yeah.
Well,
It, typically, my emotions make me pay attention to it. And it sounds like similar, like you picking the cactus needles, like whatever feelings you were having, making you say, why the
Mm.
heck did I do this? I'm never going to do this again. I think our emotions guide us in a way, or bring to consciousness, bring to awareness disorientation, whether it's as it's happening or after it's happening, or even just looking back on our life. What were you going to say about that, Tony?
there's a natural loop that the Wilds in the Woods is built around, right? It's this stepping from the familiar into an unknown or a wilder space, doing what you do out there, explore, cover ground, and then return. Right? And both the experience of stepping out and the experience of stepping back in involve some conflict or resistance, right? Where what came to mind listening to you talk there, Josh, was um, the weather in the mountains. That how quickly it can change and how dramatically it can change because of the way air interacts. Where when you're up at that altitude, the air gets very cold overnight, regardless of the time of year. Then the sun is really hot. So when the sun comes up and it's clear, then that air gets really warm and you get more storms than usual, or more volatile weather. So he's like, those are um, the same or similar dynamics to what we're talking about. That when you get done with the thing and you go back to take a bath, then it's that experience of being pushed and being stretched and being challenged, bumping up against how good it feels to be comfortable. And remembering, oh, it's really seductive to be comfortable. Why would I choose to be uncomfortable when we have the ability to stay comfortable pretty much all the time? And so it is it's it's a natural thing, I guess, right?
Yeah,
That we feel that way, and then a half hour later, it's like, all right, let's do that again.
yeah, it's really good. That's a helpful way to process it.
What other ground did you want to cover, Evan?
I think this is like a wild moment episode. I'm still processing a lot of the weekend. I think I'm still not fully caught up on my sleep as well.
Yeah.
We woke up at, I think, 4 a.m. the first morning and 5 a.m. the second morning, and sleep did not come easy to me in the mountains at that elevation, uh, with the weather the way that it was, and with Josh snoring next. Now I'm just kidding. Josh wasn't snoring next to me. So I'm to think about this. I will be thinking about this for a good amount of time, and setting aside some time to think through this. I like, Tony, maybe we can end on something like this, or we could riff on what you just talked about, Tony. Is central to Wilds in the Woods is this loop. And I don't know that we could talk about that loop too much. I think that is Wilds and the Woods, is this loop of like leaving the comfortable. I think we'll come up with 100 different ways to say it over the next 5 years. It's like leaving the comfortable, entering the uncomfortable, and then returning to safety, home, comfort, warmth, and learning from that loop. That seems accurate. And then identifying those loops on micro and macro scales so that we can learn from those loops.
Yeah.
I got a. Oh, go ahead, Tony.
I was just going to say, I have been really pleasantly, maybe surprised isn't the right word, but I've felt better since coming back. That it did feel like a hard reset in some ways. That um, flying back from Colorado to Canada on my 40th birthday and having a night in Toronto with Seville, and we went out for my birthday, had a fantastic like date and evening, which we don't get many of those with the two little monsters running around at home. And then coming back yesterday, we're recording this Tuesday morning, and seeing the kids again after a week away, which is the longest I've been away since the two of them were both around. I feel like a better version of myself, a more connected version of myself. But then this morning, getting back to work, starting to feel just a little bits of stress, around all the things that I got to get done today, and just holding on to that. The lessons revisited during our time out there has been really great. Josh.
Yeah, this was a last minute recommendation from my wife, and it is a unintended design element of the weekend, which I think is really special. But we were originally going to have two different campsites this weekend, the way that I had it like worked out in the logistics. But my wife made a recommendation. She's like, why don't you all do a base camp? So there's no, two different breakdowns, two different setups. So I had like a great campsite in mind, and we ended up getting it, which is awesome. But it provided that base, that home that we had to leave both mornings. And then we would come back at night, the first night. And so I'm interested in your guys' experience. Thursday night, we had base camp, hung out, great night. We leave pretty darn early Friday morning. We climb a 14,000-foot peak, come back down, return to base camp. Was there any sense of comfort, or what was that like coming back to a place that was familiar in the woods for you all?
Yeah, I think that's a great identification of the loop. There was a sense of known, like at that place where we had created warmth. I associate warmth and comfort, or warmth and safety. Like if a warmth is a symbol of comfort and safety to me. So like one of the first things we did when we arrived at base camp was light a fire, which was like a symbol that this is warm, this is safe, this is our known now. We this place was unknown. We light a fire. Now it is known. Like that makes the transition, because you don't just light a fire leave a fire. Typically, you spend time around that fire. Anyways, I think there's a lot of symbolism there with where we light fires, and I haven't necessarily associated that with our logo yet either. But there is like this fire component that could be explored in a few episodes. But yeah, coming back to it was great, particularly because I was slightly dehydrated, had a little headache, and needed to just sit down. After, I was pretty beat up after the day one, so having a place that felt known from our time there Thursday night was good for me.
That's well put. And yeah, that the base camp was a good idea. And it was, try to think of what the flip side would have been had we just kept going. And then there's the experience of basically making camp again, or finding camp the second day would have been just different. I mean, both would have been good. Like that experience as well would have been valuable. But I think for our purposes here, it was really good to have that camp. And also that spot was fantastic.
It's pretty
This-
awesome.
Epic.
yeah, in this stand of tall pines and next to a valley, you can hear the stream running. You step out and you can see, you know, the mountains right there. Had a beautiful view of the moon. Evan got some fantastic shots of the stars on the first night. It was, yeah, good call on that campsite, dude. Even though we uh, had to off road for like 40 minutes before we came to the sign saying this is where the road ends, and then we had to walk for another 10 minutes. It was most definitely worth it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I don't know if people understand when you say off-road what you're meaning. Like it was legitimately off-road.
what came to mind was Josh's story about how he flipped the Polaris, or like the four-wheeler recently. And I was like, is he gonna flip the Tacoma?
I'm glad I didn't think about that story as we were driving down the road.
I actually thought about that story and you guys thinking about that story, and like, oh, it all makes sense now.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
Man,
as we're just sitting in the back, feeling the back end, sort of
yeah, slide
fishtail.
out from
Yeah.
under us.
That was a really fun drive in.
Sure
Uh,
it was.
That's
I
awesome.
also, one thing, like the same thing with the loop and thresholds. You'll hear us talk about thresholds a lot too. I think one of my most special moments or things that like stick out in my mind was, so Lake Yan is at 12,100. It's like right above tree line. And then we had another 500, 600-foot climb to get through this pass to go into a new valley, new national forest, all that good stuff. And we have to cover ground through this like scree field, just like rocks everywhere. And there's this like beaten down path just from how many people pass through it. And I remember being like super high up, and Tony, Evan, and Billy are a little bit further down. Like I was going up to be able to take some pictures of them. And it was just like a brilliant just picture in my mind where you have like these trees, this like area of comfort. It's where our base camp was. And then it's just rugged, it's desolate, it's rock, it looks treacherous, and there's these three dudes that are just grinding up this hill. And I just remember just how much work it takes to get out of the comfort area, like you were talking about, Tony, and just how cool of a symbol that was in my mind. Just three guys willing to put in the work to cross through this threshold to get a little uncomfortable. But it was really meaningful for me to be able to. I've looked at that picture like multiple times, just all three of you just grinding through that rock field, which was pretty neat.
When the experience of being out there and putting in that work over the 35 miles or whatever it is we covered, actually, um, you, I've done a number of things like that at this point, and it's it's just valuable to go through that experience, step into the unknown, spend some time out there with some intention, which we had talked about while we were out there. And with this being my 40th birthday on our, as we were ending the thing, I had a lot of intentions going into the thing. And coming back changed in some way, plugging back into life with just a little bit of a different feeling, that the the sort of learning that comes from experience, right? It's not an intellectual learning so much. It's something much more essential. It's yeah. I mean, that's why we're doing this thing, right? It's like it's what's in that photo, right? That experiential learning, and that we come back, not that we changed ourselves, but that the experience helped change us and shape us in some way.
Yeah. And not just us, but those are like, it was an experience for my family as much as it was for me, which I don't know that I was expecting that with this trip, but like it was disorienting for Grace. It was disorienting for the kids. And there's a reorientation that's happening with all of us that is pretty mind-blowingly awesome. So yeah, there's a lot to be explored here. We're gonna put some photos from this up on our website, wildsinthewoods.com. Say we just do like a blog post about our journey there. Maybe we can all contribute some words to those photos. But we'll have those up by the time this podcast releases. And if you'd like to do one of these with us, that won't be our last unrationed. We're calling that unrationed. Like, this is the Unrationed podcast. Going out into the wilderness is an unrationed event. If you'd like to do that with us, sign up for our email list at wildsinthewoods.com, and we'll let you know when we're going to be entering the wilderness, literally again. And you can join us. We would love for you to join us. And yeah, do you guys have any other closing thoughts on that for this episode? No,
You,
that's it.
you did really well, Evan.
Mhm.
That's You did a hell of a job. So
Thank
did
you.
Josh, actually, in organizing that. It came off without a hitch. It was really fantastic. I know it was a ton of work for you, so thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
uh,
ow!
that's it. That was the Unrationed podcast.